Hello and welcome to LitUp 2021. My name is Haley Lefholz. I'm a youth services librarian, with Mid-Continent Public Library, and I will be helping to moderate today's interview with Ryan North. I'm going to give some quick introductions before turning things over to today's teen moderator. Ryan North is the New York Times bestselling and Eisner-winning writer whose recent work includes the nonfiction How to Invent Everything, a survival guide for the stranded time traveler, the semi-fictional graphic novel adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, and the so-far-fictional Unbeatable Squirrel Girl series for Marvel. He's also twice collaborated with William Shakespeare, yes, that William Shakespeare, on Choose Your Own Path versions of his plays. He lives in Toronto, where he writes for video games, television, and his long-running webcomic, Dinosaur Comics. Oh, and he once messed up walking his dog so badly that it made the news. Interviewing Ryan North today is Addie Valeer. Addie has been attending LitUp since it first started, but this is her very first year helping to plan it. She's been a bookworm since she was 4, a writer for nearly as long, and she feels qualified to be here today solely because she once dressed up as Squirrel Girl for Halloween. Unfortunately, everyone just thought she was a really cool squirrel. She's had a lot of fun planning this event this year, the festival, and she just hopes that everything goes super well, and I have no doubt that it absolutely will. Addie, it's all yours.
I'm really glad to have you here today. I'm just really grateful for your time.
My pleasure.
First things first, I have heard the story, but I think that'll intrigue our audience. So how did you mess up walking your dog so badly it made the news?
So it was a rainy day, and I was walking my dog Chomsky, and we went to walk by a skate bowl, which is basically like a drained out swimming pool. Very steep edges, turns out. And I want to take a picture of my dog down there with the cool graffiti. And so we hopped down, I took my photo, and then I realized that I couldn't get out carrying Chomsky. And I just walked around for like 10 minutes being like, there's no way I'm stuck in this pool. There's no way I'm stuck in this hole. And then turns out I was stuck. And so I posted on Twitter being like, hypothetically, if I was stuck in this hole, how would I get out? And over the course of an hour, people actually tweeted me out of the hole. And so I escaped. And I thought, that was a fun lunchtime jaunt. And then I got home and I saw that the UK newspaper, The Guardian, had a story about it. It said like Canadian cartoonist got stuck in hole. The worst part was they had a stock photo of just like a splash pad, a very shallow, like this deep swimming pool. And all these experts in the comments were like, well, I would have easily just stepped to the right to get out of that hole. What's this guy's problem? So that is the story of how I messed up walking my dog so badly it made the news.
Awesome. So you're famous for getting stuck in apparently a very shallow hole.
My true legacy.
Yes. So you've written a book, Survival Guide for Time Travelers, which obviously, since there's a whole book's worth of information, there's a lot you have to say for them. But if you had to send someone back in time and could only tell them one thing, what would it be?
Gosh, it would depend on what time period they're going to. But if they were going to the time period between 200,000 years ago and 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago and 50,000 years ago. That is about when humans first developed language, around 50,000 years ago. And if you were to go back 200,000 years ago and teach those people they're called anatomically modern humans because their bodies look just like ours. If you taught them how to talk and how to write, like how to write your ideas down, how to turn invisible sound into visible shapes scrawled on a wall or on a piece of paper, if you're making paper, you'd be giving every civilization on the planet 150,000 year head start. So if that sounds like something you'd want to do, that's what I'd recommend when you're traveling to that time period. If not, penicillin's a great thing to have. Yeah. Always handy.
That definitely sounds like something you would want to do. Give everyone 150,000 year head start.
Yeah, think what that video games would be like.
Yeah. How did you come up with the idea to write that book?
It's funny. It was an idea that I had in my head since I was like 6 years old. I saw Back to the Future, and that's about a kid who goes back in time. And of course, you think, well, what if I went back in time? And there was this idea of, I'd say, hey, everyone, I'm from 1,000 years in the future, and we have great things like antibiotics and computers. And they'd say, terrific, how do you invent antibiotics and computers? I'd be like, I don't know. I promise you they're great. And so it was this idea, this kind of it's almost insane worry that I would be a bad time traveler. I didn't want to be a bad time traveler. And so I kept waiting for someone else to write this book I wanted to read. And finally, I was like, fine, I'll write it myself, which sounds like a joke, but it's true. Like writing a book is a lot of work. And I would have rather just read it instead of having to research the whole thing and write it all down. But it ended up working out pretty well. And it was a lot of fun to just feel like now I am a competent time traveler. Now I don't have to worry about going back in time, not being able to invent a battery or a steam engine or a locomotive. Like I've got that stuff. I'm ready. Put me in, coach.
So now we know if we ever need a time traveler, it should be you or someone who's read the book.
Yes, absolutely.
You've written a lot of different mediums. Do you have a favorite or do you like to switch?
Yeah, I have written a lot. And I think my first and true love is comics. There's a couple of things I love about it. The first is that it's such an expressive medium. The second is that it is an inherently fun medium, right? Like if you see a really bad movie, it's still kind of fun. Like movies are still kind of fun. And comics are like that. If I hold up like a page of written word, a page of prose, and a page of comics, your eye is going to go to the page of comics because it's colors, it's excitement. And also what I love about it is that it's a collaborative medium because I don't draw well. I mean, I can draw, I don't do very well. And when I write a comic script, that's just like one ingredient in the pie. And the artist and the inker and the colorist and the letter, they bring so much to it and they're all bringing their best. It's like you've got a whole team with you when you're making comics, all trying to do their best work and make you look as good as possible. So I really love, honestly, the joy of writing a script and imagining it in my head. Like I close my eyes when I write and I can see what the page could look like. And then I get the pencils back from the artist and it's better than I imagined. And that is it's always a thrill to see something that you've written be better than what you ever thought it could be.
That's so cool. So how much do you get to see like the art before it goes out?
So the way the process normally works is I'll write a script and then the artist will do thumbnails, which are just tiny sketches of what the page could look like. And they usually won't show me their thumbnails because I'm not a very visual thinker and they're the professionals here. So they've got that part. Then they'll show me pencils, which are basically the pencil sketches, the rough draft, what the page will look like. And I'll say, oh, if I have any notes, I'll say, maybe we need to see this element here. So make sure they're holding a book or something. But beyond that, usually don't have very many notes. And then it goes to inks, which is just like a black and white drawing. And then it goes to colors where they color it and the letterist puts the words on top. And you've got yourself a comic strip, I should say, comic book.
Is writing a graphic novel much different than just a comic?
There are some who would say that it is, but I don't really feel like there's much of a difference. I mean, if I'm writing a webcomic, that's a page a day. So each page kind of has to stand alone. If I'm writing a monthly comic, that's usually 20 pages a month. So I want to have some sort of cliffhanger every 20 pages to make you come back and get the next issue. If I'm writing a graphic novel, I know you've committed to the whole book, so I can sort of smooth that out a bit. But beyond that, it's comics is comics for the most part.
When you were writing Squirrel Girl, did you have to worry a lot about the whole like Marvel universe, or did you just focus on Squirrel Girl?
No, you have to worry about the rest of the Marvel universe because everyone, imagine like a sandbox. We're all trying to tell different stories in the same sandbox. And there would be times where I'd want to use a character who's not a Squirrel Girl character. For example, I want to use Captain America. And my editor would have to go over to the Captain America's office. And they say the Captain America office. I always picture like Captain America there, but it's usually the editor. So they go to the Captain America office and say, can we use this character? Can we use Captain America? And usually they'd say yes. Sometimes they'd say, right now he's dead, or right now he's in space, or right now he's had the super soldier serum sucked out of him. So he's an old man with no powers. And sometimes I'd say, oh, okay, well, I'll use someone else. Other times I'd say, no, you know what? I want to tell a story with this old man, Steve Rogers, with no powers. That sounds like a lot of fun. So it can be, sometimes you feel like, I just want to use Dr. Octopus, but he's dead right now. And other times it's like, I would never have thought of having an old man with no powers in this scene, but I'm going to go for it. Thanks, continuity.
So when you were writing, like, I kind of have a question that pertains to that, crossovers with other characters, like full issue crossovers. I think there was one with like Howard the Duck.
Yes.
How did you go about starting those?
So that one was funny because that was my first crossover, like full issue crossover. And the way it happened was that the Howard the Duck writer, Chip Zdarsky, is a friend of mine who lives in Toronto, like I live in Toronto. And the artist, Joe Kanonis, is a friend of the artist on Squirrel Girl, Eric Anderson, and they both lived in the same town. So we basically just had lunch and said, what if we did this? And they also had lunch to discuss some stuff. And so it was basically an excuse to hang out with your friends and, tell a story with each other. I later found out when we did a crossover for people who didn't live in Toronto, who weren't already like people I could call up and go hang out with, that there's a lot more emails involved normally where you say, here's the outline, here's the characters I want to use, here's where it's going to end up. Is everyone fine? Who's writing what? But with that one, we just sort of sat down and said, okay, what if we had Craven? What if we had a van? The van would be called the Cravan. Got it. Ship it. We're done.
That's awesome. What's your favorite part about like collaborating with other people on these things?
It's the fact that you don't know what's going to happen. Because I think people sort of imagine a comics writer as, I write the script and the artist's job is to draw the script. So I am just this impossible taskmaster who does this beautiful script carved in stone. No one can touch it. When the reality is I write a script and that script is not meant for readers. It's not even really a first draft of the story so much as it is just ideas for the artist. Like, here's something we could do. What do you think? And the artists I work with, most of them they'll give me feedback. They'll move panels around or change dialogue or say, you know what, this needs to be 3 panels instead of 1, or I'll compress or expand. They do so much to take this script and make it into something that's more than it is. It's sort of like I could give you a recipe or I could give you a slice of cake. They're not the same thing. Like, one is clearly done and one is just one way to get towards that cake. And you're going to change the recipe as you make it. If that works. I think that makes sense. Yeah. I'll stand by my words.
Good analogy. Yes.
Thank you.
So when writing like adaptations, like Shakespeare, Choose Your Own Adventure style, or Slaughterhouse-Five adaptation, what drew you to that?
It's different for the artist. So I did some choose your own path versions of Shakespeare one's called To Be or Not to Be, which is Hamlet, where you choose what Hamlet or Ophelia or Hamlet's dad does. And the other is called Romeo and or Juliet, where you control Romeo and Juliet and do these adventures together with one or both of them. And in that case, a lot of the fun was that Shakespeare is this really, really, really canonized artist. Like, he's gone from being a good playwright to being a great playwright to being considered the best possible playwright of all time in the English language. And when you're that sort of canonized in the culture, taking those stories and putting them in what's seen to be a lower form of art, this, second person, choose your own path books. I felt like I was breaking the law in a really fun way. So the fun was just like, yeah, you know what? I am going to do this and no one can stop me because he's been dead 400 years. So that was sort of the fun of that. It was just sort of breaking the rules. Well, with Slaughterhouse-Five, I'd read Vonnegut as a teen, and I loved him and really, really, really respected him and did not want to be the guy who messed it up. So I was a lot more, had a sense there of, this is heavy and you don't want to be the guy who screws up Vonnegut, and just like do your very best job because you're carrying Vonnegut with you. Well, with Shakespeare, there's so many people who rip on Shakespeare all the time. I had no fear that someone would say, Ryan, you've ruined Shakespeare for everyone. There was no danger of that. So it felt, one was sort of wacky fun. The other was, how can I do the very best job I possibly can? I mean, I think they're both good jobs, but it's just sort of the weight of expectation for one of them, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. So did you have to reread those books like over and over and over again?
It's funny, not as often as you'd think. For the Shakespeare plays, I actually only reread them as I was writing my version. So I would go up to a point where I forgot what happened next and read the play and be like, oh, here's what happened next. Got it. So it was very, very seat of the pants and fun in that way, because it saved me from being too tied to the original story. Because the whole point of a choose your own path book is to branch out and do new things. With Vonnegut, what I did was I bought a new copy of the book with really, really thick margins, thickest margins I could find, lots of blank space on the page. And then I just put notes on each page. This would be great to put in the book. We could cut this, we have to have this part in. And so I ended up with a version of the book that I'd written all over. And then I did this, I guess nerdy, but I found very practical thing where I basically just did a quick formula that said, the prose book I have is, say, 400 pages long. The graphic novel has to be 172 pages long. That gives us a compression ratio. So as long as I continue to hit this ratio as I write, then I know that I'm not making it too short or too long. Because the thing with writing comics that is harder than prose for sure is that the page is your basic unit. So if you write a prose story, you can cut out a paragraph, all the other paragraphs just reflow around it. It's no big deal. Like, it doesn't break anything. But in a comics page, you can't just cut out a panel because there's nowhere for that space to go. You can't rearrange the whole book. And so with a comic, you're basically cutting a page, if anything. And I really didn't want to be in a position where I, was supposed to write a 175-page graphic novel and wrote a 176-page graphic novel. And I had to figure out where I can gain that space back at the end.
Are there any other unique challenges that come with writing comics?
Yeah, there's tons. I mean, it's challenges, but it's also a joy, right? Like, the thing you have in comics that you don't get when you're writing regular stories is that you have full control over the page. And I write a lot of comedy, and that's super powerful because a lot of comedy is pacing, having the punchline land. When you're writing prose, you don't know where your punchline is going to be. It could be at the top of the page. It could be interrupted by a page turn. Like, it's completely out of your hands. But in comics, like this is a page, and panel 1 here, this panel 6 is here. The eye is going to travel like this. You've got so much control over what's happening. But with great power comes great responsibility. You need to give the reader a reason to turn the page. So I always try to have at the end of a page either a punchline or a question, a small question that gets answered as you turn the page. So great example is, the last panel of the page, there's a sound and someone says, "Who's there?" And it's not much of a cliffhanger, but you're wondering, like, who is there? I'm going to turn the page and find out. You don't notice it, but your subconscious goes with that. And if you do that for every page, this is a great comics writing tip from Ryan. If you do that with every page, it gives the book a forward momentum that's almost invisible, but it'll make you feel as a reader like, oh man, that I just got absorbed and that carried me through in a way that you don't even actually notice. So it's fun. It gives you superpowers writing comics, but there's also you have to be aware of what the medium imposes on you.
That's super cool. How did you use the little bottom text to help with momentum?
Yeah, so a lot of my comics, I called it alt text. I started doing webcomics, doing my webcomic Dinosaur Comics. And there, if you hovered your mouse over the picture, an extra punchline would show up. And I tried to bring that into comics by putting tiny words at the bottom of each page. And I mean, part of the origin of it was that comics can be a not inexpensive hobby. Comics cost money and they can be expensive. And I like the idea that I was literally cramming jokes in the margin. Like, you're getting your money's worth. I put all the text I can. Don't worry, you'll get your money's worth. But it has a sense of surprise. Like, hopefully, ideally, you don't notice it the first time you read until you're partway through. And then you think, oh, this book has more to offer me. Like, I thought I'd read it, but there's still these little surprises underneath. And so that's sort of what really appeals to me, the sense of surprise and secrets in the text, and also like extra jokes. And I'll tell you, when doing stuff like with Marvel, I had also had an unexpected but very useful structural role where, for example, if I was telling a story and say, like an early example, Captain America got the super soldier serum sucked out of him. These stories are all taking place in the same universe, so I have to acknowledge that. But it stops the story dead to have this old man walk up and say, "As you know, Squirrel Girl, I am Captain America, and I've recently had this super soldier serum sucked out of me, which is why I appear to be an old man right now." And her to say, yes, like that just kills your story dead, as you have to go over this mandatory plot scaffolding. But with those notes, I just have a little note at the bottom. It's like, hey, by the way, he's an old man right now. Let's all roll with it. And bam, you're done. Just continue with the story. So it worked out really well in terms of a shared universe plot scaffolding thing.
Marvel Universe Footnotes.
Yes. And I just finished writing a Power Pack series that does not have footnotes. And it was really hard not to have that crutch anymore. I'd be like, all right, I got to do it all on the panel like a real writer. Fine, do it.
I find the webcomics really interesting. I ended up reading Dinosaur Comics like all night last night. And there are so many. How do you manage to keep coming up with so many interesting ideas?
Yeah, so Dinosaur Comics is, I believe, 18 years old this year. And that's a long time to do anything. Like, that's, if I had a child instead of starting a comic, she'd be an adult now. It's a huge amount of time. And the other thing with Dinosaur Comics is that it's always the same pictures. I just change the words. And, initially it was just like, can this be done? I'm going to try it. but I very quickly realized that part of the secret of it is that I'm never facing a blank sheet of paper. Like I'm never sitting down and being like, how do I write a comic? What even is a comic? Because it's all right there. I know it's going to have a talking dinosaur named T-Rex in it on the first panel. I know there's going to be Dermesium limus in the third panel. So and the panel layout is unexpectedly so flexible, right? Like it's the same 6 panels, but if you type the word later above one of the panels, you've changed the story those pictures are telling with just one word. So I think I've realized after 18 years that using the same art, it's actually not much of a restriction at all. It's incredibly flexible, but it's a benefit for just starting to write something. And also I like the characters. Like I love hanging out with these dinosaurs 3 times a week. So I keep doing it.
Do you have a favorite dinosaur character?
In my strip or in general?
In Dinosaur Comics or in general?
I love them all equally. They're all my precious babies. But I feel like there's more of me in T-Rex than in the other characters, which is dangerous to say because he's not the brightest character. But I see myself a lot in that.
It kind of felt like I was reading at some times like an internal monologue, like thoughts you might have had at some point. Does that help? Like, do you just write down the random thoughts you have sometimes?
Yeah, no, this is like a great writing tip. Like sincerely, I do that. I'll tell you a story. I was doing an interview with my school paper when I was an undergrad over a decade ago. Wow. And she asked me, where do you get your ideas? And I said, oh, well, I write them. I answered honestly, I said, I write them down in this giant text file where I put like ideas I've had or snippets of dialogue or things I'd like to explore. That way, when I'm stuck, I don't know what to write. I can open up this text file and look at it and get inspired. And she said, okay, interesting, no follow-up questions. And then I read the interview when it came out a week later online and in print, and she'd misheard me and didn't write text file, but textile, like a rug. I have this giant text tile that I look at for ideas. I'm like, that's such a better explanation of just like, you want to be a writer? Get a rug, put it on your wall, look at it, you're set. Writer's block, just stare at your rug, you're golden.
I love that idea of pinning all your ideas to a rug.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I read Squirrel Girl before I read Dinosaur Comics, and I noticed how consistent the like humorous writing voice is, which is awesome because it's really good. So how did you develop that voice?
That's a good question. I think the start of it was when I had just graduated school and I was writing emails at this job I had, and I wanted to appear professional but not mean. And I discovered that the period in an email looked really serious. Like, I need those documents now, period. I was like, oh man, if I could just not sound like such a jerk all the time. So I changed it to like, oh man, I really need those documents now, exclamation point. Can you get them to me? 2 question marks. And it was so over the top that it read as friendly and joshing and not just like dour and stern. And that voice of the enthusiastic, excited, not the brightest, but still reasonably curious character is sort of, that's where T-Rex is. That's what he looks like. That's who he became in the comic. And that same sense of, this is a sensible character. She's funny, but you're laughing with her, not at her. Like, that's Squirrel Girl. She's clever and she's empathic, and she's funny, but you're not laughing like, oh, look at this stupid woman with a squirrel tail. Think, oh, this lady's great. And she's got some good quips. I'm in. Like, tell me more about her. So it's I guess practice, but its origin, to answer your question, starts with me wanting to write nicer emails to strangers.
Yes, the punctuation is very expressive. I think
so expressive.
Yes,
so expressive.
So cool. You have such a good handle on using it.
I've had fights with editors where they're like, with Squirrel Girl, one of the issues was they let me do the double question marks and double exclamation points. And then a few issues in, I noticed they're being changed to triple exclamation points and triple question marks. And I was like, whoa. Like, that is not the same thing. What is happening here? And they were like, oh, we have a house style where it's either single or triple because double looks like a typo. And I was like, okay, I don't want to pull out my linguistics degree here, but there is a difference And it's really important to me that we not just change single exclamation points to triples. That's just wild. And they put a exception in the style guide for my comics. I'm the one who gets to have double question marks and double exclamation marks. So like they're different. And what are you doing question mark exclamation mark is different than what are you doing exclamation mark question mark. Even that is different. There's so much nuance and subtleties that get conveyed by, like we could talk about punctuation all day clearly, but it's important, and it's how you convey tone and sound in a silent medium. And you just can't like smush it all down into a set framework. Like it's human communication. It's going to break your rules, man.
Do you find those like little details, like punctuation, to be really important in getting your message across?
Yeah, 100%. I'll tweak it. I'll try it different ways. I'll say it out loud and see what punctuation pops in my head when I'm doing it. Like you are generally working in a silent medium, and punctuation is how you get across tone, how the person says it. And it's punctuation. It's putting words in bold and italics. It's putting words in caps. One thing Squirrel Girl does is the characters speak in mixed case. So they have capital letters and lowercase letters. Usually the Marvel style is all caps, because that's the way it's been printed for almost 100 years. And, it works once you're into that idiom, but there is a difference between a word in bold and a word in caps and in bold. And I didn't want to lose that nuance. So I got to have that too. And it works real. Galactus shows up in the comics. He speaks in all caps and all bold. And no one else does that, but Galactus is this cosmic space being. So of course his voice is going to be all caps, all bold.
So a long time ago, like when I was probably 9, I read a joke article that was like the worst superheroes. And this was before Squirrel Girl came out and she was in it. And then a couple of years later, when the comic came out and it was amazing, I feel like everyone was really surprised that someone could develop Squirrel Girl so well. So how did you do that?
That's a good question. She was initially there as a joke because, her name rhymes in certain accents and she has this tail and it feels like it's this ludicrous, squirrel powers, how dangerous can it be? And the idea of doing a comic based on that, you couldn't really sustain it, right? Like you're not going to be laughing at this person for 50 issues. And so what we decided to do was, well, she's not going to be the butt of the joke. She's going to be the one making jokes, like I said before. And also, like, let's make her a person and not a punchline. And it's not hard. Like she has friends. She has interests outside of just the squirrels. Like she still loves squirrels, but she knows more than that. She's a computer science major. She's learning this stuff. And it very quickly became a group of characters that I really enjoyed just hanging out with, which is weird. And I've heard writers say this before, and I was like, come on, you don't hang out with imaginary people. Like that's a thing writers say where they're like, oh, the character spoke to me. And I'm like, that's never happened. It's not real. But then it started happening. I was like, oh no, I really like hanging out with Squirrel Girl and Nancy and Koi Boy and Chipmunk Hunk and Brain Drain. Like these are great. And so having that sense of these are people that I like made it very easy to hopefully get that on the page and convey that to other people. Or so you feel like these people, they act like real people. And it was a challenge too. Like Squirrel Girl is a smart woman. And so as a smart woman, she has to realize that the best way to fight crime is probably not punching people until they stop doing crimes. And so that determines kind of stories you can tell. Like that means you have to think harder when you're writing a Squirrel Girl book. You have to be a reasonable person who's compassionate and trying to solve these problems, who happens to be able to talk to squirrels and jump really far and crush steel in her jaws and things like that. So it was really sad to end the book, to leave the book, because there are some sort of superhero stories that you can use with other heroes, but I felt like a Squirrel Girl story is in its DNA a Squirrel Girl story, and I couldn't just copy and paste that onto like some other superhero. So it felt like this is not the last time I'll get to write her, because I hope to do something with her again someday, but it felt like an ending in a way that, I'm clearly not great at them, having 18 years of Dinosaur Comics. I have not figured a way to end that. So it was sort of my first big ending to deal with.
Did you have anything planned like for the ending, and like, how did you make that special, I guess?
Yeah, I did. I had this idea. The first issue with Squirrel Girl involved Galactus, where he shows up and she goes to fight him, and she realizes they're better off as friends. That this nice sort of, they connect very quickly in a fun way, because he's the first one who's ever approached her as a peer and not a terrifying space monster. And I had the idea shortly afterwards it would be a nice bookend if Galactus returned and could do something with the story. And I also had this image of like Squirrel Girl getting beat up and losing somehow and stumbling backwards into a giant purple Galactus boot. And so I had that image that I sort of kept in my back pocket the whole run of the book. And I knew that would be the ending, but it wasn't until I'd started writing it that I started thinking, okay, like how does the story actually go? And what do they say to each other once she bounces into his boot? Like what's there? But it gave me, again, like it wasn't a blank sheet of paper. I had that one image that I could sort of build the story around. It just became a story about saying goodbye, really. Galactus can see outside of time and space, so he can effectively talk to Squirrel Girl and say, like, this version of you is ending, but we'll always have the time we shared. And there's some moving scenes there. And in the graphic novel, the Squirrel Girl at the Marvel Universe graphic novel, the only way I know to write these moving scenes is to try to move myself. So I am crying when I'm writing the sad parts. And hopefully it comes true. But it's one of the reasons I always try to write alone. Like to write comedy, the only way I know is to try to make myself laugh. And it's really embarrassing to be a guy at your keyboard in a coffee shop going like, oh, good joke me. So I write where no one can see me, and then I can laugh and cry all I want and not feel any shame for my big important feelings.
So do you write the kind of like books that you want to read and that make you feel the kind of things that you want to feel?
I think eventually, yes. Every book I've written, I would like to read, and I feel like I can't read it somewhere else. Otherwise, I would just read it. Like I was saying with the time travel book, I would have rather have read it, but I wrote it instead because it wasn't being written. I don't know if I could write a book that I wouldn't want to read, because the only way I know to tell if a book is good is to read what I've written and see how I react to it. Like you're gauging your own worst critic. And I think I could write a bad book that I didn't like, but I don't think I could write a good book that I didn't like or I didn't think was worth reading. So, I mean, you kind of do what you can. I remember I was asked once, like, how do you write comedy? And I said, I try to make myself laugh. I'm writing for anyone who shares my sense of humor. And that reached print as I'm writing for anyone who has a sense of humor, which is a way more egotistical thing to be saying. To be like, you know what? I write people who are smart and who get it. Bye. So it's, I write for anyone who shares my sense of humor, I think. And all you can do, whether it's humor or drama or anything, is hope that what you're writing connects with people. And the only way I know how to do that is to authentically connect with yourself. I'm making it sound very therapeutic. I don't think it's actually as therapeutic as it sounds, but you are your own first reader, and you have to, if you're not happy with what you're writing, why would anyone else be?
It definitely does connect with people. One of the things that I was thinking about was how Squirrel Girl is so empathetic. Like you were saying, she doesn't just like, she does punch people, but she doesn't just like, psh, psh, that's all. Yeah. And do you think that empathy helped more people relate to her?
I think so. I mean, what she's doing in a superhero context is unusual, but what she's doing in just like a human context isn't. Like, there's a standard thing in superhero books where two heroes meet each other, they have a misunderstanding, they fight for a bit, and then they're mates. They realize like, oh no, we're on the same side here, because fight scenes are cool and we all want to see them. But with Squirrel Girl, she's like, well, can we talk about this first before we start punching? Because I feel like in real life, you've probably had way more arguments with people than you have had fist fights with people, because you use conversation to de-escalate the argument. And so like, that's what she does. She tries to not punch strangers on the street when they don't like each other. There must be some other way to solve this problem. And that ended up being a really fun way to explore superhero conflicts, because, instead of beating up Kraven the Hunter until he stops doing crime, she says, well, what is your problem here? Like, what are we actually fighting about? And if I can solve this for you, then nobody has to fight today. And over the course of the 50 issues, their relationship became a really great friendship. And it really, like, it wasn't planned. It's just every time Kraven showed up, they got along better and better. And I was like, man, this Kraven guy is great. I love how they interact with each other. So it's another sort of pleasant surprise where the story grows in the telling.
I really loved the that aspect of it. Were there some people who weren't as pleased with you developing the villains so much?
I mean, maybe. I don't know. Probably. I know that, like I said, it's a shared sandbox, and no one was using Craven at the time, so I got to use them and develop it in this way. But you can't always expect that Craven will be continued in that way in other books. So there was this really subtle joke, or almost like clue, that I don't think many people noticed. There's one issue where basically Craven's on trial for being a bad guy, and Squirrel Girl's in the stand, and the prosecutor asks Squirrel Girl, like, do you think Craven is a villain? And she says, no, in my books, he's a hero. And inside comics, when you're writing a book, writing a comic series for Marvel or for DC or anyone, you don't say I'm writing a comic series, you say I'm writing a book. I'm on the Batman book. I'm on the Squirrel Girl book. So it was a subtle clue that, like, within the realm of Squirrel Girl, he's a good guy. He's becoming a good guy. And you hope that carries forward. It doesn't always, but it's all you can do, right? Like, so much when you're writing in a shared universe that is 60 plus years old, there's stuff that is tried and doesn't work. There's stuff that's tried and works. It's just sort of, you wait and see what happens. So it's really a really interesting form.
Yeah, it's pretty unique to Marvel, I think. Have you carried that empathy type superhero over into your other comics?
Kind of. I think it's interesting, and I think that there's definitely room, and perhaps it's time to interrogate the use of violence in comics. Like, beating up robots, sure, we all love to see robots explode, and you can use oil instead of blood. It's great, chef kiss every time. But when you're telling stories about superheroes, those are often stories about justice, and there's a lot of ways that you can get justice without violence. And I'm not saying like Squirrel Girl still got into fights, and when it was inevitable, like, she fought Dr. Doom, tried to talk him down, doesn't work because he's literally Dr. Doom. That's never going to work, but she tried. And I think there's room for those sorts of stories. But I think there's also room to sort of interrogate, like, what are the stories we want to tell? And I don't want to say I'm like, too high on my horse, Squirrel Girl's changed the world, etc. But I just think that there's room for those sorts of stories. And they're interesting stories because, especially in superhero context where you're working with a universe that's really old, you're always trying to see, like, what's new, what hasn't been done, what can I do? How do I tell a Spider-Man story that hasn't been told before over 60 years of Spider-Man stories? What do I have to say about Batman that hasn't been said 100 times? Like, you have to find something new there. And caring about people, I think, there's still some untilled soil there.
That's really good. I hope that more comics are like that, because that's awesome. I guess another thought I had was how writing like Squirrel Girl has influenced your writing since then.
Yeah, it definitely has. I've been working on the Power Pack book that just sort of wrapped. I think the last issue is coming out this month. And the premise of that book was there are these kids with superpowers that they hide from their parents. And the event in the Marvel Comics was that every underage hero has to get a mentor. And so they need to get like this older hero to mentor them. And one of the things their mentor says is, you have all these powers, and it's probably, like we were saying, may not be the best use of them to go and punch, purse thieves until they stop stealing purses. If you generate energy, you could like literally generate power. You could give free power to schools. Like, there's the stuff that is heroic and betters the world, but isn't as instantly dramatic as that. And it's interesting because I felt almost dangerous exploring these ideas because people buy comics because they want to see superhero comic adventures. And a lot of those involve dramatic, high stakes fights. And I don't think you can remove them entirely. And they're not removed entirely in the book. But when you start thinking of like this woman, Julie Power, is a clever woman, she would see this. She would want to be able to do the most good. How do we incorporate that into the genre without blowing the genre up? If this genre is based around superhero conflict, we want to keep that, but we still want to interrogate something new. So that's definitely a note that I would not have been thinking about without Squirrel Girl that made its way into Power Pack for sure.
It's a good balance between, the punching and the
moderate amount of punching.
Yes. Do you ever get writer's block?
Yeah, no, all the time. Tell you a trick I use. I have here, I'm wearing these ones, a portable headset, little microphone on them. I put these on and I walk my dog and I talk to myself. And the headset makes people think that I'm having a very important business conversation. But really, I am trying to figure out a story. I'll be putting myself in a character's shoes and just saying things in their voice, almost having conversations as them to see, who they are, what they want to do, like trying to get inside the head of the character. That's one thing I found that helps a lot, is changing my location, going for walks, talking to myself, and thinking of things. And usually it's rare that it works perfectly and I sit down and say, I've solved my problem and write a whole book. But it's also rare that I come back from the walk and I have nothing to show for it. I've usually got some idea I can put on the paper and noodle with. It also helps to manage your deadlines so that you've got the time, because if I don't have time to go for a walk, a leisurely hour walk with my dog, I'm going to stay at the computer feeling stressed and getting nothing done. Like, you need to know what works for you and to sort of structure your life around that. I found out that I work best in the mornings. I can write in the mornings. Great. I'm so bad at writing after like 3:30, 4 o'clock. So I try to answer emails then. I'll write in the morning, I'll do emails in the afternoon, stuff like that, where you do what works for you so that you can get what's on the page. Most writers I know are weird night owls, where like they get up at 10 and then they like do nothing until 6 and they eat dinner and start writing until 4 in the morning. And I was like, I would get nothing done. Like, that does not work for me. I'm glad it works for you. We'll never work together because I can't be beside you doing this.
I get a lot of ideas on walks as well. I
It's
think
great, isn't it?
it's awesome. Having that time to just clear your head and, I don't know, move, it helps.
I discovered it once. I was writing Dinosaur Comics. I had spent literally 6 hours trying to write for the 6 panels, getting nothing done. And I went for a walk. I sat somewhere else and I wrote down 3 comics on a piece of paper, just like that. And I was like, this is the secret. If it's not working, what you're doing is not working, then don't do that anymore. Do something else.
So to bounce off of that, how do you deal with deadlines? I think it's kind of hard to be creative on a deadline.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, the truth is, I was about to say you can't. I think it's very difficult to. One of the things you can look at in history, like countries, museums, stuff, they commission art. They want a nice painting for their new building, they'll commission it. And very often, these artists are paid a lot of money, and the art over time, like it's forgotten. It's not great art because you can't throw money at art and get great art. And I don't think you can throw time at art and get great art either. I think at the end of the day, most things that are creative are never finished. They're just abandoned. You're like, this is done. I'm done with it. I could probably spend another 3 weeks on it and make it slightly better. Who's to say? But at a certain point, you have to cut it. So for me, I always think like, you may not be the best writer. You may not even be a good writer, but you can be a punctual writer. And a punctual writer is better than a great writer who never hits their deadlines. So I've always hit my deadlines, and I do that by knowing how long it takes for me to write and putting in those buffers. So an issue of Squirrel Girl, I know I can write about 7 pages a day on a good day. So if it's 20 pages, I should be able to write that in 2.5 days. The truth is, I give myself a week. And there's days where I write 7 horrible pages and I throw them out. There was one time in my life where I wrote all 20 pages on one day, and I thought, this is amazing. If I could do this every day, I could publish 30 comics a month. But it only happened once, never happened before or since. It was just like the stars aligning, and I had a really great vibe going. But building the space into your deadline so that if something's not working that day, it's not the end of the world. You can still go for a walk. You can still watch TV and forget about it for a couple hours. That helps me a lot. So I'm just focused on it and worrying about it. There's some people that they thrive under that. They get so much done under a deadline. The last day they pull an all-nighter. That was never me, and I can't do it. So I build my life around not having to do it.
That's a really good strategy. I don't thrive under procrastination, but I tend to do it.
Yeah. If you can get it done, like, that helps.
Yeah.
And honestly, a bad draft can always become a good draft later. Part of it is sort of giving yourself permission to write something that's not good, because tomorrow you might fix it. And one of the things I do is I write my 7 pages, and the next day I reread them. And usually by page 3, I'm revising and saying, no, I can do this better. This is not good anymore. I thought it was good. There's this idea, I think it's called like the crappy goblin, who when you leave your computer, the crappy goblin comes and makes sure you've written crappy because you thought it was good when you wrote it, and you come back and it's not anymore. And doing the revision the next day, I think, is time long enough to see what worked and what doesn't, and punch it up if you can.
Does writing the dinosaur comics so often, does that help you like just get things out there and just finish them?
Yeah, it does. Man, I think it also taught me about deadlines too, because early on I would write the comics the morning of. So I get up in the morning, 7 a.m., write the comic, it's up by 9. Ideally, sometimes I'd have writer's block and the comic wouldn't be up till 11 or 2 or 6 in the afternoon. And that was me spending all day trying to write 6 panels. I did that for years before I realized, if I wrote 2 comics one day, in the morning I put up the comic I wrote yesterday and start working on today's comic without the deadline of all my readers waiting for me to push this comic online. And that helped a lot. And also, like, after almost 2 decades, I've gotten pretty good at finding my way around those 6 panels. So I sort of know what the comic will look like a lot better. So I've gotten faster at it, or at least better at it, or hopefully both. I wish I had a better answer than practice helps. It really does.
It's a great answer. Is having such a large audience online, what are the pros and cons of that?
Oh, wow. Okay, pros are people are reading your stuff, which is always nice. They'll give you feedback, always nice. Cons are you have a responsibility. And a person, say on Twitter, a person with 10 followers can tweet pretty much whatever they want because the only people reading it are their friends. They know when you're joking, they know when you're not. A person with 70,000 followers, I have to picture when I tweet, I'm walking to a microphone of a literal stadium full of people and saying like, "Hi, I'm thirsty today," into the mic. Like, it kind of has to have value a lot of the time. And there's responsibility. Like, you are responsible for making yourself a better person and for not spreading hate. And it seems like, oh, how hard could that be, not spread hate? But like, you need to be aware of which words hurt people, even if you didn't intend to hurt them. Like, if the word is loaded, if the word causes damage to people, don't use the word. Like, it's not a hard thing, but you need to do the work and realize like, oh, this word is bad. This word hurts people. I shouldn't use it anymore. And I was lucky. I started Dinosaur Comics in 2003. I was 23 years old. And I would have readers. I remember I did a comic about, I forget what it was about, but T-Rex said something was dumb. And I got an email from someone who's like, "Hey, I work a lot in the deaf community, and dumb is a hurtful word for us. And you're a good writer. I'm sure you can think of other words." And I was like, you know what? I am a good writer. And so like, it wasn't a hurtful call out. It was just someone saying, "Hey, I think you do better." And me saying, "You know what? You're on." And I haven't used the word in the comic since. I didn't make a big deal about it. I just stopped using it. And that sort of thing where I could have written back and said, "Screw you. I love the word, but you have a responsibility to like do better." It's not a huge responsibility. It's just a baseline thing. I think one of the things about being a human is making yourself a better human, and no one else is going to do it for you. You got to do it yourself.
I found that really interesting how you picture like a whole stadium. Because I think most people, when they go online, they don't really see the people that they're talking to.
Yeah.
They just see them as like a username. Does that help you humanize the people that are interacting with you online?
It does. There's 2 tricks I use. I say a stadium because I once went to a baseball game in Toronto and there's like, this attendance is 70,000 people. And I was like, hey, that's Dinosaur Comics readership right there. So I looked around, I was like, these could all be my readers. Oh no, that's a lot of people. What am I doing? I don't want to screw up. Sorry, what was the question? I got distracted.
Oh, yeah, like I think a lot of people only see the people they're interacting with.
Oh, yes.
Username.
Yeah. The other thing to keep in mind is like, I kind of like to imagine everyone I encounter is having a bad day because then they say something really like crappy to me. I'm like, well, you're having a bad day. Or also I'll assume that they're 12 and I'll be like, well, you're 12. You'll learn, you'll get there. And it's kind of really patronizing to assume that anyone who says something mean to me is a like literal 12-year-old, but it stops me from reacting. And I kind of like how precocious these 12-year-olds are. So pretending everyone is a child, I think works out well for keeping you polite.
That's a pretty good strategy to keep yourself from getting too reactive. I think.
You don't want to like yell at a 12-year-old. They don't know what they're doing.
Yesterday, I found the website, every topic in the universe except chickens. I have to ask if you've noticed any vandalism on the chicken page since then.
Yeah, so that was an article based on a conversation I had with a friend where the joke premise was that Wikipedia has a vandalism problem. People vandalize articles, so you can't rely on it for absolute truth. And we could solve this if everyone agreed to just vandalize the chicken article because dudes already know about chickens. And I made like this one-page website describing this modest proposal of why we should all do this. Had a lot of fun with it. I think it was in a couple papers. And what happened was people started vandalizing the chicken article, which, I was younger, didn't realize the power I had. And so there's a Wikipedia level called semi-protect, where you can't edit an article unless you have been a member for, I think, 3 months. And the Wikipedia chickens article is semi-protected to this day. Whenever they unlock it, people keep vandalizing it. And I'm like, I'm sorry. It was a pretty good joke, but I didn't feel bad about it. I'm glad you have the solution in place. So that is one of my, one of the things I've done.
When you have your own Wikipedia page, how does that feel?
Weird. It started, I think it was a couple of years in Dinosaur Comics when someone made a Wikipedia page for me, because you're not allowed to make it for yourself. They notice and they delete it. And I don't know who did it, but I knew they weren't a friend because all the information was like telephone game slightly wrong. Like I studied computer science with a minor in film, and it said that I studied film. And I was like, there's an element of truth there. Like there's someone adjacent to one of my friends clearly made this. But there's a whole page on Wikipedia where they say, like, you do not want a page about yourself, and here's why. And one of the reasons is that, like, you don't control it, it can be vandalized. Another reason is that it's probably going to be the first results. If you do something you're ashamed of, like, so let's say I get arrested for murdering 500 people, that's going to be in the Wikipedia page, no matter what I do. There's no comeback. I mean, the controversy section of any Wikipedia page is always the most interesting one. So there's downsides, but also, like, I was in Prince Edward Island. I was helping a friend get married, where I was going to do the officiant for them. There's this meeting I went to, and the guy beside me were introducing each other. He was a flight attendant. I told him I was a writer, and he Googled me there at the table and interrupted me, like, whoa, this guy's got his own Wikipedia page. I was like, I'm just here to help some friends get married. Like, I'm not here to be famous. So it's interesting. It's sort of just like a fact of life. Sometimes it's vandalized. A friend of mine, his page was vandalized to say he died over the weekend. And it was a weekend where he was not using his phone.
Oh, no.
So, like, I didn't know still afterwards. He was like, hey guys, I'm not dead. Like, thanks for ever vandalizing my Wikipedia page. Still here. Sorry.
Yeah. Has that ever happened to you? Any like vandalism on the page?
Nothing major.
Good.
The best thing that's happened, and it's from Google scraping Wikipedia to answer questions and getting it wrong, is for a while, because when you type in something to Google, you'd be like, how high is Mount Fiji? It'll give you the answer right there. That's their knowledge engine doing that. And for a while, if you said, who's Ryan North's wife? It said it was Dame Judi Dench of the James Bond franchise. And I was like, you know what? I'm with it. That sounds great. And then I made the mistake of tweeting about it, and someone at Google followed me and they fixed it. So I'm no longer married to Dame Judi Dench, unfortunately.
That is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So what was it like writing webcomics like so early in internet history, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny because at the time everyone's saying, oh, it's too late. Let's just start doing webcomics in 1997 instead of 2003, because that's when the real things were. I'm sometimes asked people, like, what's your advice for starting a webcomic? And I'm like, you got to understand, like, I started my webcomic 18 years ago. There was no Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, like no social media at all. There was no YouTube. Like, there was your own website, and that was it. And so my advice is, like, I posted on some news groups. I put up signs around school shipping little dinosaurs with the URL on them, because back then people would see a sign that had like quant.com on it. They're like, oh, I'm going to go home and type that into my computer. No one does it anymore. No one's like, oh, wow, real life spam, sign me up.
Website.
Yeah, I got a new website. I gotta check this out. So it was different. It was certainly different. The nice thing was that at the time, and this has changed, being online famous was great because people knew you for what you did, but they didn't know what you looked like. So I could go on my computer and people would say, Brian, I like your work. And by extension, I like you. And I'd be like, oh, that makes me get a giant head. Thank you. I feel great. Then I go outside and no one knows who I am. I'm like, all right, no, I'm just a guy. So I never got like famous weird. It worked out really well as a regulating element. But I feel like now, like a lot of fame is tied to what you look like. If you're doing anything that shows your face, and that can get distorted very quickly. I think it's a lot harder for people today to hold true to who they are when you've got, you know, a million people saying they love you and they recognize you on the street. Like, then, like, what is your life then? You're always on. You're always that famous person. You can't just go out looking horrible in a stained t-shirt like I can and do all the time.
Oh, so are you glad then that you started in 2003 and didn't have to manage like all the different social medias as you started?
Yeah, I think a lot of people my age were grateful. So the larger version of that is grateful for coming of age on an internet where our mistakes were both invisible and forgotten, and also done under pseudonyms because no one used a real name then. And it helps, right? Like, there is stuff that I wrote when I was 12 that I honestly would like to read again today, because I remember writing some really cool Star Trek fan fiction. But there's probably some really embarrassing stuff there, and it's just gone. Like, you can't, it's no longer exists. And now there's money to be made in storing data, and so stuff doesn't disappear as well or at all. And that's hard, right? Like, it's a much harder world, I think, for people younger than me, and that's kind of not what you want to have. You want to make it easier for the next generation, instead of being like, okay, so you're being raised in a world with pervasive, always on internet with consequences. No one has ever had this in human history, but figure it out. Let us know how it works out for you.
Yeah. If you could change one thing about the way the internet is, what would it be?
Okay, that is an amazing question.
Thank you.
This is not a good proposal because there's so many ways it could fail. But, and it would absolutely fail, like this would be bad. But in an ideal world, I feel like knowing people's age, like, I feel like there's so much outrage on Twitter. Someone says something hilarious, like hideously offensive, and everyone has to tear it apart for the whole day. And it's like, that was probably just a kid. Yeah. And if it was a kid on the playground, it'd be like, hey kid, that's a bad opinion, do better. And you'd forget about it. But since everything is flattened, we don't know if it's like a head of state or a literal child saying these things, we all give it the same weight. And there's benefits for that for sure. And I think, like, children deserve to be listened to and taken seriously. But there's also downsides of everything these people are saying is being taken with the same weight. So it would never work. And there's hideous downsides to making that mandatory. But in a magical world where me and only I could know how old everyone is, then I could just do my 12-year-old trick, but I know it's based on actual science at that point. This guy actually is 12. I feel even better about it.
Having kids not be, I don't know, held to the same intense responsibility as everyone else. Yeah,
exactly. Because, like, I am 40 years old. I've had probably 30 years of useful consciousness to get better. And I hold 40-year-olds different standards than I hold 20-year-olds or 10-year-olds, like, because they're younger. We learn by making mistakes too. And when everything's online, those mistakes are going to be online. And there's a way to learn from mistakes that doesn't involve ruining your whole life. There's ways around that. We should explore them, I think.
I agree that how public mistakes are, I think, nowadays can be pretty harmful.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting and such a deep topic too, because, like, I believe there should be consequences. Like, yes. If you do something horrible, then there should be consequences for that. But I also think, like, those consequences can very quickly grow wildly out of scale and remain around forever. Like, this hasn't happened, but I could have easily posted a Dinosaur comic in, say, 2004 that I regret now for being something, let's say something horrible. And I would have learned from that. But I don't think it's fair to be pulling that comic up after I've learned and apologized and made amends and done better, and just, like, have that follow you around for the rest of your life. That's not viable. Yeah. It's weird. It's such a fraught subject with so much nuance. And I don't think we've solved it as a culture. Even, like, I don't think anyone has solved it. It's just something we're all sort of muddling our way through, trying to find a way out of.
Yeah, having nuanced discussions over text is hard.
Yeah, it turns out. And you rely a lot on punctuation to get across tone. You need those double exclamation points. Exactly. And okay with a period, that's serious business. It makes me think of the generational change in texting and language, where, like, grandparents will think LOL stands for lots of love. And so you'll see these exchanges where like, oh, my house burned down. They'll be like, OMG, LOL. No, grandma, it's not what you're supposed to say.
It's not funny.
It's not funny. Why are you laughing at me?
Is there a reason the site is named Quants?
There is. I wish I had a better story. The origin of the comic is that I was in undergrad in a class, and the class was divided into thirds. And the assignment was to do something interesting with the internet. And each of the groups, I was a team leader for mine, got assigned a different randomly generated domain name. There was Celerica and Bayesium and Quants, and my team was Quants. And I was a bad team leader. And after a few weeks, my team had done nothing. And I was like, all right, well, I kind of want to do a comic. So I just put up the comic and ran with it and kept going after the class finished. So it has literally no meaning, but the domain name was certainly available. And it's at least something that, like, when people talk about Quants, they're talking about that comic and nothing else, which is nice.
Well, why is it dinosaurs?
So it's clip art because I don't draw. And I had this ancient clip art software from like 1997 in 2003. And there were two sets of useful clip art where you could pose the body some. One was dinosaurs and one was astronauts. And my initial idea was, I'll do dinosaur comics for a month, then I'll switch to astronaut comics because I'm going to run out of ideas. And then the month went by and I was like, new layout's a lot of work. I'm just going to stick with dinosaurs. And it turns out that it was a very flexible layout, like we discussed. So it basically comes down to the choice of some clip art designer in 1997 to make dinosaurs where you could pose their arms and legs. But that said, I didn't move them from the default poses. They're in the default arms positions anyway. So it's not a very visually celebrated strip, but it is a strip that uses visuals.
That clip artist had no idea how important they would be.
No, I never heard them. I hope they find out one day. Yeah, when I started Dinosaur Comics because I didn't, I read a lot of indie comics. There weren't a lot of webcomics at the time. I read a lot of indie comics where it was the same writer and artist doing everything. It was one person. And I kind of got this unexamined idea in my head that that was the only way to be a cartoonist. And since I couldn't draw, I figured, well, I'm gonna be a writer, I guess, a comics writer. I'm gonna invent this job. It turns out I was not inventing the job; it was an existing job. But it's I think it's really appealing to, and I think there's advantages to working in a medium that is a visual medium when you're not a visual person, because that's clearly someone else's strength, but you can bring strength beyond that medium. And I always say, like, people are like, what if I want to be a comics writer, what should I read? I'm like, well, read comics, but also read things that aren't comics, because everyone who likes comics reads comics. And if you only read comics, you'll be doing the same stuff everyone else is doing. But if you're reading comics and watching like 1950s romantic dancing comedies, you're seeing stuff that they're not seeing that's going to make you think thoughts that they're not thinking. And so that the wider your media intake is, the wider you read stuff that you would have thought would never have interested you. I think it's fascinating. My favorite thing to do back when you could still do it is to walk into a movie theater knowing nothing about the movie, no trailers, nothing, and just sitting down and be like, I'm going to figure out what genre this is in as it's happening to me. It's
so
terrific.
the visuals of movies, I know a lot of musicians are really influenced by movies. Do movies influence you a lot as well?
They can, because there's you can draw some connective tissue between comics to storyboards to film, and there's clearly things that are adjacent there. But the main difference is that comics, you have full control over time, and film, you don't. Like a moment can linger on a comics page for as long as you want, but in film, it lingers for precisely as long as you make it linger. Like it's set in stone. One of the things I do now, which annoys my wife and others, is that since I normally write comedy, when someone is doing comedy, if it's a funny movie or I'm seeing stand-up, I'm trying to figure out the joke as the comedian or the show is doing it. And so I will sometimes laugh half a second before the punchline is delivered because I've gotten there myself and it was a great punchline, surprised me and made me laugh. And people hate that because you're laughing at the wrong time. And also it makes me a tough crowd. Like I've seen movies and stand-ups where people around me are laughing and I was like, I got to that joke 5 seconds ago and either I've heard it before, or that it was too rote because I could invent it myself, or the delivery in my head was not as good as delivery as theirs, and I've already ruined the joke for myself by telling it poorly. So it changes the viewing experience because you're analyzing it as you're doing it. But it's also fun, I think, to be analyzing movies and be like, well, what's this story choice doing here? Why did they make the characters do that? What do we get? What's that bias to have this thing happen and not this other thing? And talking about the movie afterwards with people who are also interested in that, to be like, wasn't it interesting that they made this happen instead of that, and how that changed the narrative? Because it's like you're learning from watching movies all around you. It's not work, it's fun.
So knowing about like what happens behind the scenes when you're making a story, that helps when watching or reading other media.
Yeah, seeing, like, knowing that, you know, sometimes you can't do this thing, sometimes Larry's might be saying you can't do it, but even just like looking at the final result and saying, hey, you know, the camera lingered on that gun at the beginning and that gun never showed up again. That's weird. Was there a purpose to that, or was that an editing mistake? Or that made me worry, when is the gun going to show up? So I was tense for the whole movie. Maybe that's intentional. There's a trick. You show this gun, people are going to worry for it to go off for the whole time. So it's stuff like that where you sort of interrogate your own reactions to what happened that lets you discover these kind of narrative tricks in that form. And if it works in movies, maybe it can work in comics. If I write a comic called "This Gun's Gonna Blow Up the Moon," and it shows up, but you don't know where the gun is, Phil, like, where's the moon gun? I'm worried. What if he points it at me?
Is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, I think all I'd add is that the greatest thing about writing is working in a medium you love. And the great thing about writing in comics is that it's such a young medium where there are still things being discovered about it. And like, I always think, when I think of a great video game, it's fun and it's engaging, but it's also doing something I haven't seen before. And if you think about it, that's an incredibly high bar. For a great video game, for me, has to do something new with the medium that I have not seen done before in history. And I can't really apply that to novels. Like, novels are hundreds of years old. I don't read novels that I expect to see something new that hasn't been done with words and text before. But when I read comics, I see that happen. There's stuff happening in comics. I'm like, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know that was possible. How exciting! I've got a new tool in my tool belt now that we've got this trick figured out. So it's a young medium, it's a developing medium, and that's always a ton of fun to be playing in, for sure.
That's so cool. Get to see it evolve.
Yeah, be part of that evolution. And I've done conventions where this woman came up and said, so what is this? And I sort of launch into Squirrel Girl, because I got all these Squirrel Girl books on my table. It's like, no. Like, what is comics? What am I looking at here? I was like, oh, I get to be your first comic book. Like, what an honor. Like, to introduce someone to the medium is huge. And so I explained that comics are, you know, words and images in deliberate sequence, and they're very easy to read and very fun to read, and they can do all this neat stuff that prose can't. And here's Squirrel Girl. And she walked away with the Squirrel Girl comic. And I was like, man, I the sense that you get to be someone's first comic. Like, imagine being someone's first book. Like, I represent books to you. Please enjoy. I hope I don't screw it up. It's huge. It's crazy.
Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Again, that was wonderful. A great interview, great questions, fantastic answers. So just some last minute closing remarks, I suppose. A thank you to everyone who is watching this when that is available for them. We appreciate it. Thank you to Addie for conducting such a great interview. Really awesome questions. As I was reading them, I was immediately interested in what you would have to say. I am also a Squirrel Girl fan, so I was like, oh, that'll be good. Oh, I'm interested in that one. So this was fantastic. And of course, Ryan, thank you so much for taking some time being here with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Such a wide range of interview questions and giving us the little insight into the life of a comic writer. We hope that everyone has enjoyed watching this session. I hope they get to check out some more really cool stuff coming up with LitUp 2021. And until then, thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.